I live at the epicenter of what became a global movement for racial justice when George Floyd was murdered just 7 miles away from my home. Within hours of the news breaking, people from all over the world reached out in an empathic embrace toward Minneapolis. Minneapolis was the place where George Floyd had hoped to rebuild his life. Like so many others, he came here to address chemical dependency. It was a city brimming with hope. Ultimately, of course, Minneapolis became the city where his life would end, on a sidewalk in a city that had been only an idea just a few years before. A city that would burn in the wake of his murder, on a sidewalk that is now covered with murals and dead flowers and was soaked with the tears of people he never knew. At the marrow of our bones, we know what it is to yearn for life. When we see that yearning in others, we know it more deeply in ourselves. Only this blood-bound wisdom explains the ruthlessness of what happened to George Floyd. Shackled at the wrists, face down in the asphalt, his breath squeezed from his body for over 9.5 minutes. Empathy is an affirmation of life. More than that, it is the affirmation of the striving for life in another. His striving is what broke us. The injustice of seeing that striving ignored the mercilessness of his killer, refusing his own compulsion toward empathy. The cataclysmic shock from witnessing what happened here made room for profound grief. Grief, the very stuff of our own rescue. I believe that grief is sacred work. It levels us, humbles us, opens us so that we can be transformed. Oscar Wilde wrote, "Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground." Well, then surely the asphalt at 38th in Chicago, where George Floyd drew his last breath, is holy ground. It's a place made holy by the pilgrims of grief who have come to Minnesota to break their hearts open in front of a corner store. A place made holy by a promise to do better, be better. Made holy by a promise for justice. Honoring that holiness means acknowledging the emotional strata under our feet here in America. If we want to save ourselves from being completely engulfed by a rapidly spreading infection of hatred and moral relativism, we must acknowledge the intolerable contradictions baked into the very founding of our nation. We are a nation of free people built upon a legacy of slavery, theft, and genocide. Until we acknowledge these truths, attend to the despair and devastation they have wrought, and address the inequity initiated by heinous practices generations ago, we will be at war with an enemy which we cannot ever win: ourselves. Racial healing work isn't work that we do intellectually. It's whole body, whole person work. It requires that we clear and restore the energetic and emotional pathways between the head and the heart. It requires that we honor our intuitive knowing, that we acknowledge how learned behaviors have conditioned our thinking. It's work that both white people and people of color need to do. Racism is a poison. That's not a metaphor. Its toxic effects on people of color have been well documented. Not only does it daily diminish a person's quality of life, but it provokes disease, which steals away precious years from people. Cancer, stroke, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, low birth weight, infant mortality, depression, addiction, all attributed and connected to the experience of weathering racism. It is a poison. Less clear are the metabolic toxicity and effects of racism on white people, but many other costs have been documented. Loss of cultural identity, loss of childhood friendships, loss of beloved familial relationships due to the politicization of race. A profound and ambiguous sense of loss characterizes so many white folks' experience with race and racism. White people endure such costs because they are afraid of confronting something they fear more. James Baldwin said it best. I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. There is so much pain in our human past. So many refusals to recognize the fundamental dignity in others. We have committed unthinkable atrocities against humankind and used our religious beliefs, counterfeit science, and our business ledgers to rationalize barbaric behavior. We have been so callous, so unrelenting in our bruising of the earth. We have destroyed sacred relationships between plants, animals, and people, injuring ourselves along the way. We know that we have caused harm. It is difficult to reconcile how such harm in our past has somehow made our lives today seem more comfortable, more certain, more safe. This is what's causing us pain. Our rationalization of despicable behaviors, our justification of disregard, how we look away, how we privilege ourselves. These are profoundly destabilizing behaviors. The conspiratorial nature of protecting privilege damages the spirit. Feeling these things unconsciously can excite amorphous anger. Most of us do not have good tools to help us meet anxiety and discomfort with curiosity and gentle observation. Instead, people frequently deploy anger to reject emotional activation, and then anger gets discharged towards scapegoats in an attempt to avoid conscious engagement with privilege and with pain. The grief moving like a slow river under all of these behaviors is connected to a sense of loss or death of an idea, a self-concept, a worldview. When I remember in this country how much feels at stake for white people when confronting race, I'm persuaded to proceed with compassion. They feel trapped in a moral quicksand. Unpracticed, they have no stamina for the work, and many have never experienced positive outcomes that give them confidence to keep going. It's uncharted territory. To understand why a populist white supremacist movement is escalating in the United States, Europe, South Africa, and Australia, we have to understand the psychosomatic consequences of whiteness for white people. White nationalism is spreading quickly, exacerbated by media and the inflammatory rhetoric of far too many civic leaders. It signals deep existential damage. We can't legislate spiritual and psychological repair. We need a different arsenal of tools. We need processes through which unconscious thoughts are invited into conscious awareness with supports to guide willing defectors from the cult of whiteness toward safe harbor. This is deep, slow, and truly lifelong work. As a racial healing practitioner and coach, I make a lot of room for grief in that process. And especially when working with white folks, I try to repeatedly name the rewards that come along with stepping into vulnerability. I do this because it makes the world safer for people of color, people I love, my own kith and kin. It is not charity. People of color, those of us who represent the global majority, we too need to mend our broken hearts. We need to acknowledge that some of the coping mechanisms that we've developed to survive a society in which we experience constant threat are making us sick. We needn't dismiss them without gratitude, for they have helped us weather the impossible. Each breath we draw is a revolution. But it is time to shed what no longer serves. We are in petal fall. We can let go of what we were, like petals falling from a tree, so that new fruit can be born. Our work is not just to face the trauma in our midst and in our past, the trauma that cascades down the generations through our DNA. It is also to recover the resiliency right next to that trauma. To recognize that with every terrible, brutalizing lesson learned, we have also learned how to fight, how to survive, even how to thrive and find joy. Living at the eye of the storm, there are precious moments of peace, even as the system around us rails against itself toward a deadly end. To move away from systems of knowing that are infused with racist ideologies, all of us must recognize that our knowledge cannot be solely rooted in our intellect. Our emotional intelligence, our intuition, these delicate systems that have evolved over time to give us a sixth sense about when we are safe and when we are in danger, they're ever present and they are deeply informative. This is also where trauma resides. This is also where resiliency resides. And one of the most powerful guides we have in these dark times is our grief. What a thunderous, engulfing mother. In grief we are reborn, washed in our own tears and in the witness and shelter of others. I've been talking a lot about grief over the last 18 months. It seems to have seeped into everything that we've endured in the last 2 years, put us in touch with that raw, open nerve that connects us to all of humanity. As illness sweeps across our nation, around the world, we become aware of the delicate filaments between us that fire intermittently, made incandescent only through connection, stretching across time and space. We remember that we are part of something larger, that we are not alone. And the thought is at once affirming and alarming. We are inextricably connected. What happens to any one of us affects all of us, especially now. Nowhere is that interdependence more visible and frustrating than in a pandemic. Human beings often stay in toxic situations because they're familiar. Confronting our racial wounds feels like opening a bottomless box. We're not sure how far that pain might go when we lift off the top. I don't come to you today having completely solved similar patterns in my own life. Every day I make decisions that are based on self-interest and self-preservation, yes, comfort too. But where we are hurts. Where we've been is monstrous. And where we're going, well, that depends entirely upon our ability to learn new ways of relating to ourselves and to one another. Racial healing begins with acknowledging trauma and abuse. Conscious engagement with the past, coupled with mindful awareness practices, can cultivate stamina and resiliency. With daily practice, we find that we're able to extend our sphere of empathy toward others and deepen loving kindness for ourselves. To ease our suffering, we must go through our pain, not around it. On the other side is relief. You don't have to throw yourself over a cliff. Muscles get stronger with small, repetitive daring. We have to build deep and intimate relationships with ourselves and with others. We have to ask ourselves questions that start to tear down the facades we're hiding behind. We have to question how these facades have shaped us, informed who we know ourselves to be, and what we believe at our core. The most healing systems of knowing are deeply relational. Some are based on gratitude, like the words that come before all else by the Potawatomi Nation, or the Zulu concept of Ubuntu, which means a person is a person through other people. I am because you are. Agate Niswal, whose award-winning memoir examines the trauma and exile that her family experienced during the Second World War, said, quote, "We have to believe that even the briefest of human connections can heal. Otherwise, life is unbearable. Our salvation is through each other. To heal, each and every one of us needs to build the capacity for gentle curiosity about our own experiences and deep compassion for the experiences of others. We can't do racial healing work in our heads. We need our bodies, and we need our community. This is work that will call you into deep, reciprocal relationships. Today, gleaming before us is the great lesson, the one that leads toward the path of redemption. Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh said it most simply. We are here to awaken from our illusion of separateness. We are connected. We come into being, into consciousness, through encounters with others who have the power to affirm our very being through their witness. This has been the work of my life. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. I need help. There's a whole world waiting on the other side of our pain. Meet me there, and we'll build it